Rain hit the cafe window and Emma walked out without looking back. I watched her shoulder shake as Mark followed and shoved a small metal box toward her bag. Suspicion tightened my chest before I had time to think. I pushed through the crowd, my shoes making a hollow sound on the wet pavement, and reached them as Emma stumbled on the curb. "Emma, wait," I said, grabbing her elbow to steady her. My hand went to the worn leather notebook in my coat pocket, because I always kept it there the way some people keep keys. "What is that?" I asked, nodding at Mark's hand. Mark's face hardened. "It's nothing, Daniel." "Give her space." He tried to close the gap between them with a step that smelled of tobacco and a cheap aftershave. Claire pushed up from behind, breathless, voice tight. "Mark, don't get like this here." Claire's quick sentences cut through the rain. She always used short sentences when she was angry. The crowd around us watched with umbrellas and phone screens. The metal box slid the last inch into Emma's bag and hit a seam with a soft click. I felt my first emotion shift, from steady protectiveness into a raw, immediate anger that tugged my jaw tight. Anger made my voice higher than I wanted. "Emma, open your bag." Now I said her name the way I had for 10 years when she needed a hand. She looked at me, eyes wide, and fumbled the zipper. She pulled the small box out on shaking fingers. Mark reached for it and Claire stepped between him and Emma without hesitating. The box was dented at one corner and had a scratch along the hinge, but it closed like a trap. Emma's hand hovered over it. "Why would you do that, Mark?" Claire demanded. Mark swallowed. "I didn't." "Claire, listen. It's for her, that's all. It's a surprise." He kept his sentences short, defensive. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. She set the box on the wet pavement and brushed rain from her hair. The locket at her throat caught the streetlight. Claire touched Emma's shoulder as if to anchor her. We moved to Emma's apartment because she wouldn't let the box stay where it was. I walked beside her and watched the way she held the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles blanched. I had been at her side for a decade in ways that mattered to her and to me. That history sat in small, specific acts. Refilling her tea, turning a lamp on when she couldn't sleep, staying on the phone during her job interviews. Those were the things I did instead of saying anything else. At the door, Emma hesitated and then used the old brass key. The entry table held a stack of unpaid bills, a jar of mismatched keys, and a chipped mug. The box went between the bills and the mug like it belonged there by mistake. I picked it up, fingers damp, and felt a grit of sand in the dented metal. Claire leaned over the table, voice low. "Emma, what's in it?" Emma's thumb trembled on the hing. "I don't know." She looked at Mark, then at me. The second emotion shift moved from anger into a colder, sharper fear. I found myself imagining who could have watched her, who could have meant that box as threat instead of gift. For a moment none of us spoke. Then Mark, "Open it. It's nothing. Just open it." The way he said it made the sound ring false. Emma flipped the hinge. Inside lay a folded photograph, the paper creased where someone's thumb had pressed and a small smudge of what might have been coffee or mud. The photograph showed Emma asleep on a sofa we both had used after long nights, a scarf thrown over her, hair spread across the pillow. Someone had taken it months ago. The angle of the photograph meant the person had been in the room at close range. Emma's laugh came out thin. "Who would do this?" she asked, voice that matched the room's small scale of disbelief. She looked at Mark and then at me, searching for an explanation that would make it stop. Mark's jaw worked. I wouldn't. He stopped himself and paced the small living room, hands in his pockets. His movements were tight and short, like a man trying to fake calm. "Claire, Mark, you left your card at her office last week and you tried to talk to her after the party. People noticed." She kept her sentences clipped, dropping each point like a stone. Mark answered in 3 quick lines, the kind of rapid back and forth the rules asked for when 2 people argued. "I went to say sorry. You weren't apologizing then." "I was trying to explain." "Explain what?" "Nothing." Emma pushed at the photograph until it creased further. Her hands had stopped shaking and gone small instead, like she had folded herself inward. Who would take a picture of me asleep? Who would? The question hung and attracted the air like a static charge. Claire's phone buzzed. She read a message, then looked at us. "The landlord says a package was delivered to the lobby around 9:20. He says he doesn't remember who signed for it. That arrival of new information pulled all of us upright. External events kept cropping up every few paragraphs. The box, the photo, the landlord's delivery notice. Mr. Hargrove, did you see anyone loitering? I asked when we walked down to the lobby. The stairwell smelled of damp paint and old wood. The landlord stood under the flickering bulb with a cigarette between his fingers. Meh. Hargrove rubbed his thumb along his jaw. I saw someone on the steps earlier. Couldn't make out who. Tall. Dark coat. Didn't hang around long. He hit the way he told every neighbor's story. Brief, factual, with a shrug. A neighbor, a woman from 3 floors up, came down the stairs while we spoke and said, I saw a man take a picture from the door once. Looked like he had something small in his hand, like one of those pocket cameras. She mentioned the time and day in a sentence that pushed the puzzle forward. Back in the apartment, I opened the photograph with my thumb along the crease. The image had a corner of a watch face visible in the lower left, the leather strap caught in motion. For a moment I thought of my own watch, the vintage silver face I wore and rarely mentioned. The sight of that watch in the photograph shifted my suspicion into something else. A private dread uncoiled in my stomach and replaced the earlier anger. This looks like someone was standing at the foot of my couch. Emma. It's close enough to be someone you trusted. Claire. Mark. Why would someone do that? He sounded suddenly like a man who had not thought through consequences. Emma pressed the photograph against her chest. Whoever sent the box knew where I sleep. She whispered the words and then shoved the picture back into the box. Why would someone put that in my bag? We fell into action because we could not sit with the question. I called the number for the building's security. No answer. Claire texted a friend who worked at the cafe where we'd been. Mark paced, then stopped and said, I didn't put it in there. Ask anyone. His voice broke on the last word. Claire pushed back, then tell us who did. Mark. Tell Emma now. The argument sharpened. Each line was quick and jagged. Mark, did you give this to her? Claire demanded. No. Mark answered. No, I didn't. The room felt smaller. The rain kept hitting the windows with steady force. I could hear traffic. Emma stood by the sink, fingers wrapped around a mug she hadn't filled, and tapped her locket with a thumb. That small motion of hers, playing with the locket, was a physical sign of tension she used when she needed to think. I always watched that motion because it told me when she needed me closer. I found the note in the locket while Emma had stepped into the hallway to wash her hands. It was a folded slip, folded thin, tucked beneath the back plate of her antique locket. I eased it open and read 3 short words. Stay away, Daniel. The paper's texture scraped against my fingertips. The words were printed in a hurried, irregular script that made each letter seem like a small warning. My breath tightened. That was a twist. I'd been trying to shield her and someone else had tried to interfere with my presence in her life. My reaction changed. Anger returned, layered now with a desperate need to protect and to understand who wanted me away. Emma, I said when she came back, voice low. There was a note in your locket. It says stay away, Daniel. I saw the color drain from her face. For the first time since the evening began, she said Daniel's name in the flat way a person says fuel numbers, factual and controlled. She touched the locket and said, who would, and then stopped because she could not finish. Claire pressed both hands to her mouth. We decided to go to the landlord. He denied seeing any courier officially sign for anything, and then named a neighbor who had been outside late. The neighbor, when we found her on the stair, said, I saw a person with a hood watching the door. They left when I called the dog. Her statement added another piece. The list of people who could be involved narrowed, but also deepened the threat. Late that night, after the landlord left, I walked the stairwell to the roof alone, to clear my head. Rain beaded on the safety railing and the city spread under the sodium lamps. I thought of each small kindness I'd given Emma over 10 years and counted them like coins. Counting quiet favors had become my habit instead of confessing. The counting was a private ledger I never planned to show her. On the roof I found a damp scrap of paper stuck in the drain. It matched the handwriting in the note from the locket. The scrap had one word, watched. My breathing hit a steady rhythm of short pulls. Fear settled into my limbs in a concrete way. My hands tightened around the railing, my jaw ached, and my feet felt heavy enough to need effort to lift. I left the roof and walked toward the park, because the watcher might have moved there. The streetlight pools cut the pavement into islands. When I reached the bench under the lamp, I saw a low shape huddled there. My heart moved into a defensive beat, and I approached with measured steps. "Hey!" I called, keeping my voice low and deliberate. The figure didn't answer. I dropped my bag and crouched. The figure stood too fast and lunged at me with a blunt motion. I reacted by grabbing the attacker's arm. Hands closed on sleeves, and I pulled the person into the light. It was a man with a camera slung across his chest. His face was hidden by the hood. He swung for me, and I stepped aside, letting him miss, and twisted his wrist until the camera skittered. Claire arrived running, breath loud with effort, and grabbed the attacker's shoulders. "Who are you?" Claire demanded. He spat a curse and tried to run. I held on. The camera fell open and a photograph slid free. It was a picture of Emma and me on the night we'd gone to the river to talk after she lost that job. The image showed us together, close in a frame that implied intimacy. He's taking pictures of us together. Claire, voice sharp. "He wants to make this look like something." The man hissed, "You don't know anything." He reached into his pocket, as if for another camera. I pushed him down and pinned his arm. He laughed once, a brittle sound. "Who hired you?" I asked, voice clipped. The man didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched like he was pleased with the question. Police arrived after Claire called them. Under the lamplight, an officer asked questions and took the camera. The officer's movements were efficient, methodical. "We can run prints. We'll check the neighborhood cameras. We'll see if anyone paid him." That procedural string of promises didn't make the knot in my stomach go away. The man in the hood cursed and for a moment looked at me with something like amusement. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "You think she'll see you differently?" My name with a sharpened edge that sounded like he'd watched me for a while. Claire hugged Emma, who was trembling, and the officer took statements. Meh. Hargrove offered a cigarette to distract himself, muttering that he'd seen more trouble in his day. Mark stood a step away, face slack in a way that suggested both guilt and confusion. He muttered, "I didn't put him up to this." The police officer made a note. Mark's words did little to settle anything. At the curb under the police light, I opened my watch to check the time and found a folded note tucked under the watch face hinge, pressed into the metal. I had worn that watch for years. The note was thin and soaked at one corner from the rain. I unfolded it with a thumb that shook at first and read, "You can't stop watching her. The watcher won't stop." The sentence landed as a final, concrete beat for the night. My hands tightened on the paper. Claire Emma's name, and then waited for a reaction. Emma looked at the note, then at me, and her eyes held a question I could not answer. Something in me resolved not in a speech but in choices I made the next minute. I handed Emma the watch and the note, and I said, "Keep it. I'll talk to the police again tomorrow. I'll stay with you tonight if you want me to." My voice was steady because I chose small, specific actions instead of promises. Emma nodded once. "Okay, Daniel." She put the watch and the note into her bag and closed it. The night kept raining. The police drove away after taking the witness list. Claire stayed until the stairwell light burned dull in the distance. I walked home with wet shoes and a head full of small details to check. The landlord's delivery logs, the neighbor's times, Mark's contradictory statements, the camera's brand. Each detail was a direction to follow. The chapter ended not with clarity but with a visible, concrete sign of ongoing danger. A folded note hidden in my watch and the knowledge that someone had been watching us closely enough to stage intimacy as threat. I closed the door behind me and placed my own hand on the vintage silver watch where the note had been, feeling the damp, the edge of paper, and the determination to find out who had done this. I saw him crouched by Emma's mailbox, and the first thing I felt was suspicion. He half turned and froze when he heard my boots on the wet concrete. He clutched a small metal box like it was proof he'd been careful. "Mark," I said. The name came out short and hard. He shoved the box into the slot and looked at me with an expression I could not rid. Suspicion pushed me forward before I had time to measure my steps. I grabbed his sleeve near the elbow and felt the cuff damp from the drizzle. Mark jerked, tried to pull away, and cursed under his breath. "Let go, Daniel." He shoved past me, and in the movement a tarnished brass key slid from his pocket and hit the stairs. I stooped and pocketed it without letting him see me do it. I did not call for backup. I did not plan a speech. My jaw tightened and my hands moved. That narrowing of attention, suspicion turning to action, decided what I would do next. I had watched Emma lose the locket in the cafe before. I had watched Mark slide a small metal box toward her bag in public. This felt like the same thread pulled tighter. I am Daniel. I lived 2 doors down from Emma in the same building. I drink my coffee from the chipped mug she gave me the year she turned 26. I have loved her without saying the word for 10 years. That sentence is not a confessional now. It is a fact that colors how I react. I felt protectiveness in my wrists, not a speech in my mouth. Emma opened her door when I reached the landing. Her hair was damp and flattened at the roots, and her fingers trembled around the empty place where the locket should have been. "Daniel," she said, voice high at the end. She stepped back as if the hallway had become sharp. She saw the mailbox and the little metal hinge, and then looked at me as if asking a question I had no right to answer out loud. "Someone put something in your mailbox," I said. I did not tell her I had caught Mark. I said only what she needed to know in that moment. A factual, movable piece of information. Emma rushed forward and peered into the slot. "My locket," she whispered. Her fingers found the fabric of her blouse instead of the locket. She pulled at the seam. The space was empty. We moved inside because being in the hall felt exposed. I kept my voice low. "Lock your door," I told her. I checked the deadbolt and felt the grain of the wood against my palm. Emma's breathing hitched and her hands pressed to her chest. Mark was there. I could have lied to soften a night already sharp with rain, but I did not. "Yes, I saw him by your mailbox. He dropped a key." He looked like he was in a hurry. I watched her close her eyes for a second, then open them as if to measure the scene again. Suspicion had become fear in her face. That change tightened something inside me. We searched the apartment. I opened drawers and tilted cushions and ran my fingers along the windowsill. The latch on the bedroom window was forced, and there was a faint smear of mud around the sill that suggested someone had rested a palm there. I said the facts aloud because I wanted her to hear them and to name the danger. "Someone forced the latch," I said. "There are prints on the sill." Emma went pale and sat on the edge of the bed. She kept touching the place where the locket had been until her fingers rubbed the fabric thin. "Why would someone take it?" she asked. Her voice was small and practical, searching for a cause. We found nothing else inside. The apartment had been turned over with a care that spoke of someone who wanted one item and wanted out. On the kitchen counter we found a smear of soil near the back door. It was the kind of detail one misses if one is thinking in long sentences. It said someone had crouched near a planter or walked through a patch of wet very close to the building. We heard the buzzer, a short urgent ring, and when I answered, Sophie was on the landing, breathless, coat soaked through. "I saw him," she said before I could let her in. She pushed past me and put a hand on Emma's shoulder, by the florist. "He was asking about Emma. What hours she'd be here tomorrow." He had a box like that one. Sophie set the small metal box on the kitchen table, and the click of it sounded loud in the apartment. Sophie works with Emma at the flower shop and has the blunt, fast voice of someone who speaks through facts. He about a locket. Sophie. She used Emma's name like an anchor. He wanted to know if Emma came alone. He wrote down something on a receipt. Sophie handed me a crumpled slip with a phone number. The paper had a grease stain and a scratch. It was mundane evidence, but it made the threat specific. Sophie sat on the counter and crossed her legs. "I followed him after the shop," she said. "He kept glancing back at the window. He wasn't just stealing. He was watching." Her words shifted my suspicion into a new shape. Surveillance. The word was small and clinical, but the image it produced, a man watching Emma leave her apartment, changed the scale of danger. We called Officer Ruiz. He arrived with the slow, methodical calm of someone who has seen similar reports and keeps his voice neutral for paperwork. He took our statements on a notepad and asked for details with an even hand. Sophie described the man outside the florist. Emma repeated where the locket had been. I handed Ruiz the tarnished brass key I'd kept in my pocket. He noted the key on his pad and said, "We'll check nearby cameras. Anything else you remember, tell us." He had like a protocol. After Ruiz left with promises and an officer's card, the apartment sank into a quieter tension. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my worn leather notebook. I did not plan to write for Emma's sake. The notebook was a talisman I used when thinking carefully. My fingers closed on the vintage silver watch in my pocket, a habit as old as my worry. Emma watched me watch my own hands. "Daniel," she said. Her voice broke the silence into a different piece. Softness and rawness. "Do you think Mark did this?" She kept touching the place where the locket had been. Her fingers trembled now with anger that made them grip harder. Her sadness hardened into something else. "I don't know," I said. I set the notebook on the table and tapped the brass key. My pulse was steady, but my palms were warm. Suspicion bent toward a hypothesis. Mark had motive, possibly more than petty jealousy. Someone had been watching Emma. My next choice had to match that scale. We went down to the courtyard, because she had seen a man loitering there earlier. The cobblestones were slick and the overhead lamp gave the damp stone a yellow rim. I swept the area with my eyes and found the place Sophie had pointed to. A square of concrete under a fern box with a loose drain cover. My hands reached into the gap and pulled out a small cylindrical object wrapped in tape. It was a tiny camera. The lens was no bigger than a coin. When I touched it, a soft clank came from inside. I felt the air leave my mouth in a single sharp motion. The camera had been aimed at Emma's window. That discovery pulled the room of suspects into focus. It moved us from a petty theft to targeted surveillance. A second man stepped from the shadow near the stairwell as I pulled the camera free. He moved quickly toward the fern box and his hands went for the device. He wore a dark hoodie and had his face half covered. "Put it down," I said. I reached for him. He shoved back and my forearm met resistance. Mark appeared near the courtyard gate at the same moment and sprinted across the stones. He tried to force his way through the scuffle. His voice was a bark. "Let go!"
"That's mine!"
He lunged and hit the stranger's shoulder. Hands grabbed wrists. The camera clattered to the ground and skittered. Then it became physical. I grabbed the stranger's collar and pulled him away from the drain. He swung an elbow and I caught it with my hand, felt tendons stretch, heard a small crack of movement that sent a white-hot alarm through me. My breath shortened and my jaw clenched. Emma appeared at the courtyard entrance and shouted, "Stop!" Her voice cut across the scuffle. "Daniel," Sophie cried. She reached for my arm, then let go when Officer Ruiz's cruiser lights flashed at the street entrance. Ruiz and another officer stepped into the courtyard in 2 quick, efficient motions. The stranger took advantage of the split second and bolted toward the back alley. Mark twisted in the other direction and slipped between parked cars. I held the tiny camera in my hand and peeled back the tape. A strip of footage remained on a small memory plate. Officer Ruiz put up gloves and said, "Don't touch anything else. We'll log this." He radioed for more patrols and took statements while Sophie pointed to the spot where she had seen the man and repeated the details with the precision she had used before. The footage was partial several seconds before a door closed. In those frames, a man in a grey coat stood at the florist's window, turned his head, and then reached down to an object near his shoe. The camera shook when he moved. It showed a profile that could have been Mark's if you squinted, but there was also a second figure stepping out of frame with a slim briefcase. The second figure wore a watch with a wide metal band, not a watch I recognized, but the detail made the image more specific. Sophie pointed at the pause. "He about Emma by name. He wrote down her schedule. He was not random." Her voice held a hardness that belonged to someone who suddenly saw a map. The evidence changed the shape of what had seemed like a petty theft. It was no longer a small, isolated wrong. It fit into a plan. We spent the early morning answering questions. Officer Ruiz wrote with professional calm. Mark had reappeared by the time paperwork began. He showed up at the building entrance with mud on his shoes and a story about being in the wrong place. Sophie contradicted him with 2 precise sentences. He was outside the florist. He had the metal box. He followed Emma once she left. Her lines were short and clipped. Mark's face hardened and he spoke once in a low voice. "You were lying," he told Sophie. Mark's anger shifted the scene into confrontation. He and Sophie exchanged 3 quick lines: accusation, denial, and an ugly attempt to gaslight Mark. "Say that to Officer Ruiz." "Sophie." Mark's hands moved in small gestures that tried to erase the story. "I didn't do anything to her," he said. "I was walking by." I found the box. The exchange lasted only a moment before Ruiz stepped between them and wrote down both versions. The footage gave us the twist we needed. Someone else had been present at the florist, and had been near Emma's routine. That meant Mark might only be one player in a wider effort. My suspicion shifted again, from suspicion to guarded anger to a focused decision. I would not let this become background noise. I told Officer Ruiz about the brass key and the camera and where I'd seen Mark. He noted it and said they would check bank footage and nearby security with the number on the receipt Sophie had found. Emma stayed close to me while they took statements. She spoke in short sentences and named the things she remembered. The slide of the locket, Mark's shove in the cafe, the mailbox hinge. Her voice did not wander into speculation. I thought I misremembered the calf. I thought I dropped it. She touched the empty space at her chest, and the action made her visible fear concrete. A clenched fist at her blouse, a quick swallow. That physical action grounded what was happening. At one point, Sophie bent and picked up the small metal box from the table. She turned it over in her hands and noted a hairline scratch along the rim. "That's intentional," she said. "Someone wanted to hide fingerprints or make it look old." "It's not accidental." Her voice meant the search would not stop at a single suspect. Officer Ruiz stayed until dawn peeled the sky pink. He left with a promise to follow leads and a careful, bureaucratic firmness. "We'll check footage and interview the florist," he said. The words were flat, but they represented movement of the case out of our hands and into a legal response. It did not feel like closure. It felt like a temporary containment. When Ruiz left and the building fell quiet, I sat on the stoop outside Emma's door. I put my worn leather notebook on the bench beside me and closed my hands around it. I wanted the notebook to be something small and public, a sign that I would keep watch. My fingers curled on the cover, and I felt the weight of the key in my jacket pocket. The decision to keep guarding her life felt like a practical act, not a confession. I would not let my love become a confining speech. I would make it service. Emma opened the door and stood in the frame, coat draped over one arm. She looked at the notebook and then at me. "You left this?" she asked, voice careful. Her eyes searched my face for a purpose and did not ask the word I had never spoken. I stood and moved the notebook a little closer to her boot. "I left it so you'll know I'm here," I said. My voice was flat, but my hands were steady. She hesitated and then reached out and touched the notebook's leather. Her finger paused on my initials, scratched inside the cover, and then moved away. We did not exchange the confession that hovered between us. The night had rearranged priorities. Emma stepped out onto the stoop and looked at the street. "Thank you, Daniel." It was not a declaration of return. It was a factual acknowledgement that someone had acted on her behalf. She closed the door and slid the deadbolt into place. The sound of the bolt sliding felt like an answer to a question I had not asked. I sat back down on the bench beneath the stairwell. The sky was paling. My hands were clean of dust, but the damp had left a dark patch on the notebook where I had held it. The brass key was heavy in my pocket. Sophie walked back up the steps and paused to say, "I'll come by tomorrow. We'll check the florist's camera again." Her tone held certainty. I watched Sophie go and felt a small shift from fear to resolve. The night had forced decisions from everyone. Sophie would follow the trail. Officer Ruiz would file reports. Emma would lock her door and change routines. And I would keep my vigil without speaking the word I had kept. The chapter's conflict had a partial resolution. The camera was exposed and evidence collected, and someone had been identified as a watcher. We had not caught the entire threat, but we had moved it into the light of procedure and witnesses. A new, quieter fear remained. The knowledge that someone had chosen Emma with purpose. That fear pulsed when I imagined a second figure with a briefcase, a man who had followed routine and catalogued her movements. It was a fear I could not erase with a single act, so I pinned the night into a series of actions instead. Lock the door, call the police, follow the evidence, stay nearby. Dawn came with a pale wash over the courtyard. I stood and placed my vintage silver watch on top of the notebook. The act felt like an offering of time rather than rhetoric. I said nothing. Emma opened the door a crack and looked at the items on the bench. She did not smile. She stepped outside and retrieved the notebook and the watch, held them both for a second, and then handed the watch back to me. "Keep it," she said. "If you were going to keep watch, keep what you need." Her sentence was practical and careful. She closed the door completely and turned the lock. The The sound of the bolt sliding shut was a concrete end to the night's immediate crisis. I left my notebook on the bench and walked down the stairs into the morning light. The building smelled of wet stone and coffee from the bakery across the street. I did not speak about the 10 years I had kept my love silent. The night's events had rearranged what needed protecting. I had kept a promise without making a speech. At the foot of the steps I looked back once. The bench held the notebook like a marker. My suspicion had driven me to action. My anger had pushed me into a physical confrontation. My fear had sharpened into resolve. The camera's footage had revealed someone else, and the brass key had become evidence to follow. I did not know where this would lead, only that I would keep moving with facts and small acts. The stoop stayed empty but for a notebook and a watch. I left them there, a small public vow, and walked toward the day. I stepped into the rain and found Emma on the sidewalk, a small bouquet in her hand and an unopened ring box at her feet. Suspicion tightened my chest the way a cold hand closes around a throat. I moved toward them because I could not stand watching a woman I loved be used as a prop. Mark stood by the curb with his coat collar up, the streetlight behind him making the rain catch gold. Emma did not look at him. She looked at the box as if it could answer whether she had been chosen or staged. The problem was clear in the first breaths. Someone had left a ring for her in public and Mark was pretending it was spontaneous. I had to know whether this was a proposal or a performance. I stepped closer and the gravel under my boots slipped with the rain. Emma did not speak. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet petals until the ends bruised. I had watched her laugh and fail and rise for 10 years, always beside her and always held back by the same quiet line I refused to cross. That restraint was a decision I felt in the soles of my feet now. Suspicion pushed me forward and memory pushed me further back to other nights. The calf night when the locket slipped from Mark's hand and the mailbox crouch where I had caught him, small proofs I had not yet explained. I did not start with an apology. I asked a single sharp question. "Emma, what's this?" I said. She blinked, then let out a breathed laugh that sounded close to a sob. "I don't know," she said. "It was here when I left the shop." Her voice held a tremor that flipped from confusion to anger in 2 seconds. Mark stepped forward with the easy smile he always used when a witness might approve. "It was meant to be a surprise," he said. "I thought I'd make it romantic." His voice was calm, practiced. He kept his hands visible, as if he wanted everyone to see he had nothing to hide. My suspicion hardened into something sharper when Mrs. Alvarez, the florist, came out carrying a damp paper bag and asked for a quiet word. She was small and sturdy, her hair in a gray braid. Her voice dropped when she saw me. "I saw him slip something into her bag earlier," she said without a pause. "He came while you were inside, Daniel. He left a note and he rushed away." Her eyes flicked to Mark like a judge reading a face. That confession changed the direction of the night. The setting shifted from an awkward romantic tableau into a confrontation. My reaction moved from watchful to protective. I told Emma what Mrs. Alvarez had said. She folded her hands over the unopened box as if it weighed more than the flowers. "Why would he do that, Emma?" Her voice was small but held an edge. She kept her gaze on the ring box like it might explain a motive. I wanted to tell her the truth, the quiet years of corners and kindnesses I'd kept where no one else would see them. But that confession would not solve who Mark was in this moment. I needed evidence. The next external arrival came fast. Sarah appeared under the street lamp with her phone raised, rain beading on the screen. She had left her shift early when Emma had texted. "Look," she said immediately, breathless. "He staged this." He took a photo of her by the window and sent a time-stamped message 15 minutes before she left. She handed the phone to Emma. The image showed Mark placing a small object near Emma's bag. The timestamp matched Mrs. Alvarez's timeline. Emma's face tightened. "He tried to make me feel guilty," she said. Her voice edged toward fury. The air between her and Mark shifted. The spectators on the sidewalk sensed something real and started to edge closer. A woman with a child in a yellow coat stayed, hands on the stroller as if she wanted to see whether justice would happen here. I felt anger press into the back of my throat. My suspicion had become anger, and that anger wanted to speak aloud. I kept my hands flat at my sides so they would not give away other things I had carried for 10 years. I let the anger control my words instead of my fists. Mark, I said, voice low, why put that in her bag? Why leave the note? The quick exchange that followed gathered speed. Daniel, you remaking a scene, Mark. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to do something special. Why are you? Because you leave boxes at women's feet and call it romantic. Sarah snapped. You left a note that says think of him and walked away. That's not romantic, Mark. That's pressure. She spoke like someone who had known how Mark operated and decided not to be silent while he performed. Mark's charm faltered and reassembled like a practiced mask. You don't know the whole story, he said, aiming for a deflecting tone. Then tell it now. Emma. Her hands shook. She did not hide it. Tell me now, Mark. Why would you do that? Mark's first attempt was to laugh it away. Then he leaned in, close enough that the rain line on his jacket showed 2 fingers of wet. Emma, I thought you'd be happy. You were making it hard to be honest. He used the word honest as if it could excuse pressure. I stepped so close my shoulder almost touched Emma's. My breath came in short, controlled pulls. The emotion inside me had shifted again, suspicion to anger to a cold, steady determination. I had protected her in small ways for 10 years. Now I had to challenge a man who had decided to shape her choice. Emma, I said, look at Sarah's photo, look at Mrs. Alvarez's watch. This wasn't a surprise for you. This was an attempt to stage a yes. My fingers brushed the edge of the box. It was light. The metal of the ring case flashed when a car passed, but Emma did not open it. She pushed her hair back with a shaking hand, and finally, she said something I had waited a decade to hear and never expected would sound like this. Why didn't you ever tell me? The question landed between us like a landing gear. It was not about Mark, it was about me. My throat closed. That line, the one I'd never crossed, felt suddenly visible. Years of small actions meant nothing compared to one honest sentence. I had protected her, paid rent on bad months, fixed the heating, held her while she cried after breakups, stood up when other people left. But my silence had been another kind of pressure. The emotion shifted again in me. The hard certainty of anger toward Mark softened into shame and a raw, urgent need to be honest. Emma, I began, and my voice narrowed. I did not rehearse the confession. I've been here. I have loved you for 10 years. I didn't tell you because I was afraid losing you as a friend would hurt you more than this. I thought keeping quiet would keep you safe. My sentence hung. The rain ticked on the street lamp. She nothing for a long breath. Her fingers opened the ring box just enough that the hinge protested, then closed it. She laughed in a short, surprised way that broke into a sob. Daniel, she said, you can't just say that now. Her words were small and precise. She held the unopened box like an object that could be crushed. An external sound, the click of a passerby's phone, pulled the attention of the little crowd. A man at the corner lowered his umbrella to look. The situation escalated when Mark moved the way a man who thinks he can still control a moment will move. Deliberately, with an attempt at physical closeness, he walked toward the bench across from the florist where Emma took a seat. He wanted to set the frame of the conversation. Emma, you need to give me a chance to explain. Mark, he reached for the box. His fingers were the first to actually touch it. Emma recoiled, a clear physical refusal. Don't touch that, she said. Her voice was flat now. The anger in her voice was not dramatic, it was a pragmatic line. A boundary, don't ever do this to me again. Her words had weight because she had set them herself. Mark's expression flicked between disbelief and blame. You overreacting. He tried, we can talk about this later. He it like a man used to postponing real answers. That's when things moved too fast. He put a hand on her shoulder to pull her up. Sarah moved first, grabbing Mark's wrist. Mark shrugged her off with a practiced motion and pushed harder. Emma stood abruptly and the ring box dropped onto the pavement with a metallic tap. The sound was small but precise and the entire cluster of faces turned. I stepped between them. My hands were flat, palms out, because I wanted no one to say I had started the fight. Mark, I said, clipped. Let her go. My voice did not shout. It cut through the tension. He shoved at my chest. The movement was sudden, and there was a gasped reaction from the crowd. Mark's hand closed on the front of my jacket, and his fingers left wet prints. He tried to drag Emma toward the curb as if dragging her would force a choice. Emma screamed in one sharp syllable. Let go, she said. The scream was not weak. It had a ring of command. Mark's face went hard for a second, and then his public mask slipped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note, the one Mrs. Alvarez had mentioned. He shoved it toward Emma like an explanation. "Look," he said, "I wrote this. I told you." The note was rain-smudged and half unreadable. Sarah thrust her phone in Emma's face and replayed the time-stamped picture. He placed the box. He put the note. "He staged it," she said. Her voice was steady, not accusatory but factual. The little crowd started murmuring. Mrs. Alvarez had come to the curb and pointed at a camera feed from her shop window showing Mark's small motions earlier. The crowd's attention changed the dynamic again. Mark found himself seen by witnesses. His practiced charm evaporated under scrutiny. His speech became clipped. "You don't understand the context," he said. He reached for Emma and she stepped back. That was the climax, not a punch or a dramatic stage fall, but a public unmasking. The truth had moved from suspicion to a visible exposure. The world around us made the move irreversible. Emma's body went still. She looked at Mark, then at me, then at the wet note. She folded the bouquet stems into her hands until the paper ripped, and the smell of crushed flowers filled the space between us. Her fingers were damp from rain and her jaw was tight. "Why would you do that, Mark?" she asked, voice even. He tried the plausible, sounding answer. "I thought you were wavering. I thought a grand gesture would help you decide." His words were clumsy now. The crowd did not look convinced. "Decide what?" "Emma, decide if I belong to you." Her mouth shaped the words slowly, like someone testing their weight. He hesitated. Sarah and Mrs. Alvarez stood close by, both named witnesses now. Sarah's expression was blunt. "He tried to engineer a decision," she said. "He set up a moment so you would feel guilty if you didn't accept." Her voice carried anger but also care. Emma sank onto the bench, the ring box still closed at her feet. Her hands shook as she put both palms over her face. I sat slowly beside her because standing felt like an accusation. Sitting was a way to match the smallness of her motions. I had to answer her question without another speech about years. Actions had to speak now. "Emma," I said, fingers finding her wrist. She let me touch her because her body sought a steady thing. "I didn't tell you because I thought my saying it would make choices harder for you. I thought my silence kept you free." My voice was low, almost a statement to myself. "That was cowardice, not care. I'm sorry. I can't take back 10 years, but I can be honest now. I will leave you space to choose. No pressure, no games. I will step away if you ask me to. I will also stand up for you when someone tries to corner you into saying yes." I kept my statements concrete. No metaphors, no abstractions. She swallowed. Her laugh this time had a dry edge. "You speak like you practiced it in a mirror," she said. "Why now? Why on this night?" Her voice wanted explanation of timing. "Because I couldn't watch him stage you anymore," I said. "Because he put a box at your feet and walked away and I couldn't pretend that was fine." I kept my eyes on her hands. "Because I love you and I will not watch you be manipulated." An external event interrupted us. A police car rolled slowly past, its lights off but its presence felt. A neighbor called from an open window asking if everyone was all right. The world was alerting itself to what had happened on the sidewalk. Emma pushed the box toward me without opening it. "If you loved me for 10 years, why did you never speak?" she said. Her words were small, precise questions like a surgeon probing a wound. I did not give a long explanation. I gave a short, honest act. I reached into my coat and took out the worn leather notebook I always carried. I pulled a page from the back where I had written, over 10 years, simple lines. Times I stayed, nights I fixed a leak, moments I noticed her laughing alone. They were not dramatic love letters. They were evidence of a life spent in the margins of a days. "Read one," I said. "If you want. Or don't. I'm not asking you to decide now." My voice had a steady, pleading cadence. She took the page and read for a single minute. The rain blurred the edges of the handwriting, but she read it. The lines were concrete. The winter I shoveled her walk. The Tuesday I sat with her while she called her mother. The time I left a thermos of coffee on her doorstep after a rough interview. She nodded once, and the nod was a small recognition. "You did those things," she said, "but you kept it from me because you believed you were protecting me." Her voice softened. The emotion in her had shifted from anger to confusion to a cautious tenderness. "You were protecting what you wanted." She swallowed. "That's not what I need, Daniel." She looked up at me with green, blue eyes rimmed by rain. I need someone who will tell me the truth before deciding for me. I understood then that protection could be a selfish act if it kept her from knowing the full truth. The emotion inside me moved from shame into resolve. To accept accountability, you rewrite. I said, I'm sorry, I will not ask you for anything tonight. I will not ask you to choose between me and your freedom. I'll be here if you want me, or I will step aside if you need space. My sentences were short. I meant each one. She closed the notebook and slid it back into my coat. The crowd thinned as people realized the drama had settled into a more ordinary decision. Mrs. Alvarez came to stand a few feet away and handed Emma a tissue with an unassuming gesture that felt like an ally's small touch. Sarah stayed arms folded, watching. Two named secondary characters had acted. Mrs. Alvarez had provided the first proof, Sarah had provided the photo. Their choices shifted the story. Emma picked up the bouquet and smoothed its torn paper with a thumb. The ring box lay between us like an unanswered question. She reached down, lifted it, but did not open it. She traced the metal edge with a fingertip, then placed it again on the pavement. I won't open it, she said. Not now. I need to walk away from a man who thinks he can stage my feelings. Her voice had an even, practical cadence. The emotion inside her had settled into clarity. That clarity felt almost like relief to watch. Mark took a few steps back. His posture changed. He was smaller. He had wanted a tableau. Instead, he had been called out. He muttered something about misunderstanding and left toward the curb. The rain hit his face from a neat angle. He did not return. Emma stood. She brushed rain from her hair with both hands and then did something that surprised me. She turned to me and said my name plainly. Daniel, she said. The way she said my name was not a request or an acceptance. It was a recognition, an inventory of what we had been to each other. A practical question. Why didn't you tell me you loved me sooner? I told her in 3 short sentences what 10 years could not hold. I was afraid losing you as a friend would hurt you. I thought my silence protected you. I see now it protected my fear more than your freedom. The rain fell into my hair. People crossed the street and the florist's lights glowed warm behind the window. She listened. A passing bicycle bell rang. She laughed once, brittle then honest, and said, Actions matter, Daniel. You've shown me many things without words. But words must match them. If you want me, you must ask for me without games. Her voice had a directness that left no room for staged romance. I nodded. I will not stage anything. I will not ask you tonight. I'll leave you the box unopened. I will leave you space to decide, even if that means I walk away. The resolve in me had a sound like a hinge closing, decisive and final. Emma surprised me again. She reached for the folded note that Mark had dropped when the box fell. The ink was smudged, but she read a line aloud to the small group who still watched. He wrote, Think of him. She laughed once, and the laugh was more tired than amused. Think of him, she said. I think of a lot of people. Her hands were steady now. She stood and walked across the short patch of wet grass toward the park bench opposite the florist. She sat and folded her hands on her knees. The motion was quiet. I followed and placed myself on the bench beside her, careful to keep a respectful space. The ring box sat on the pavement between us like a small, mute object. We did not make grand gestures. We spoke in short sentences. The next hour was a series of small decisions made aloud. Emma about my life choices, about whether I had ever considered leaving. I answered directly. She me how long I had loved her. I gave a number. She if I would wait without pressing. I said, Yes. Outside, Mrs. Alvarez locked her shop. Sarah texted a photo to a mutual friend explaining what had happened. I heard her phone buzz. The bench between us became a small island where practical decisions were made. Boundaries, promises, and the agreement that no one would engineer her choice again. At dusk, I walked back to the bench alone. Emma had gone down the path a few paces, then turned and sat on the edge of a low stone wall, her silhouette against the dimming sky. She looked smaller on the park furniture. The city noise had thinned. I folded a small piece of paper and wrote 3 lines. I will be honest. I will stand up for you. I will leave you space, no flourish, no plea. I left the notebook page tucked into the folded paper and placed it on the empty bench. The action was deliberate, an invitation without pressure. I stepped away so she could make a choice without an audience or my hands reaching for hers. The emotion in me had settled into a steady watchfulness. I felt fear, the fear of losing her, and then an odd, quiet relief that I had finally made the confession. That fear had driven me to action tonight. From suspicion to anger to confession to resolve. Emma picked up the folded note and unfolded it under the dim lamp. She read the 3 lines and let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. She looked around, saw no crowd, and then slid the paper into her pocket. She stood and walked toward me. We did not promise forever. We did not dramatize what would come next. She put her hand on my arm and said, "I need time, Daniel, no pressure, no staged moments. Tell me when you mean it." Her voice was steady. I nodded. She walked away at a deliberate pace, the bouquet now a small, damp bundle at her side. She did not open the ring box. She left it where it had fallen. I picked it up later and placed it on the florist counter when Mrs. Alvarez unlocked the shop. She took it without comment, folded it into a drawer, and locked it away. The final act of the night was small and concrete. I folded the single note and left it on the bench, where I had sat alone moments earlier. I stepped away and turned once to watch her silhouette under the street lamp. She paused, put a hand to her locket, and then kept walking into the soft, golden light of the path. I walked in the opposite direction, not because I had given up, but because I had promised to leave space. The chapter ended with an action, not a speech. I left a note on a bench and walked away. The ring remained unopened. Mark left the scene. Mrs. Alvarez and Sarah stayed close enough to be called if needed. Emma had a choice to make without my pressure. My confession had finally been made, and for the first time in 10 years, the truth was in the open. I did not demand an answer. I only offered honesty and the willingness to be patient. That was my final, tangible promise. To stand where I could be chosen rather than try to manufacture being chosen for her.